Welcome to episode 20 of Radio Omnicore. I am your host, Colleen McClintock, and you are listening to the show that is guaranteed to teach you something useful and introduce you to an interesting and dynamic guest. In studio today, we have Tanya Stevens, all the way from Cape Town. She is an internationally qualified integral coach and the founder of Be Clear. Tanya specializes in the design and implementation of bespoke people development programs for individuals, groups, and corporate organizations. She uses coaching, facilitation, and training to deliver these. She's also a public speaker and is often invited to address academic and corporate audiences on resilience, change agility, adaptive capacity, and leadership. We're thrilled to host Tanya in studio today and pick her brain about all the emerging trends in resilience and leadership. So welcome, Tanya. We're so thrilled to interview you for the podcast today. I know that you do a lot of traveling up and down from Cape Town, and we're thrilled to chat to you about resilience and around all your coaching approaches. So why don't you start off by just telling us a little bit about what keeps you busy, what brings you to this place?
Okay. Well, Colleen, thanks first of all for the opportunity to be here. So maybe I should just start with the traveling up and down. So I do travel quite a bit. I always joke and say if people really want to set up an appointment, like my flight is usually Mondays, Fridays, and seat 4F, that's mine.
Oh my
so
word.
That's where people can definitely find me at least once a week. So I'm involved in the space of leadership development, but in actual fact it's people development. My role, as I see it, is helping to take people from where they are to where they want to be. And that's different for different people, depending on what their needs and their long-term goals and ambitions for themselves would be. And I've been doing this now for about 12 years. Before that, I was a business owner, and I love the combination of people development but still working in business, because that's really an interesting space to operate from.
Mm-hmm. So Tanya, just looking at your profile, I was just so amazed with how many qualifications and how many professional certificates you have and how many accredited courses you've done, and also the interesting history of how you start in business. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your claim to fame in the real estate business, what you did differently all those years ago?
Yeah. Well, so I only realized that I'm a bit of a nerd later in life. When I left school, I studied, and I remember at the end of that, I did a degree in psychology. I swore to myself and everyone around me that I would never ever study again. And I since tell people, be very careful of what you say you'll never do again, because you never know where life will take you. So to fund my studies, as a student, I needed to fund my own studies. I got involved in the real estate industry. And at that time, I was one, if not the youngest estate agent ever to register with the Estate Agency Affairs Board. I was fresh out of school. I had just turned 18.
Wow.
And it was a wonderful thing for me to do, because I was studying, and at the same time I was building up business acumen. I was getting to know about contracts, marketing, engaging with clients. So it was a very, very good introduction to the world of business. And property still today is a passion of mine. I think that it is, home ownership is so important, so topical in our country as well at the moment, the whole issue of land and land reform and home ownership and all those things. So what happened then is I was an estate agent. That went well for me, by hook or by crook. It was a good thing for me to enter into. I found that I had the ability to match buyers and sellers together, and I also had good relationships with my colleagues. So at a point, I then left my company where I had trained and I had spent many, many happy years working. And then at a reasonably young age, at about 23, I was 22 actually when I went independent, and I became an independent agent working for myself in association with other colleagues. And we had our services were provided by a third party who eventually didn't want to provide the service anymore. And I saw that as a good opportunity to actually consolidate the agents that were working independently. They had already built a little bit of a brand, and were known as being a very professional group of women. In fact, women that I still have a lot of respect for up to today. And yes, then we formalized it. I registered a business, rented premises, and we were 7 at the stage that I started that business. And then it just grew and snowballed, and we expanded into rentals, and we expanded into commercial property, and I had quite a few offices, and it was wonderful. I loved it. It was a really good part of my career. I met my husband also while I was in the real estate industry. So, it's an extra reason to love the industry. And then I got to a point when I was about 34, 35 that I really got a bit of a opportunity to do a stock take and actually look at where I was and whether or not that was where I wanted to be. So for me, that was a bit of a crossroads. I could decide to go further in the industry that I was. The industry was good to me. I was successful. But it felt like there was something more for me. And then I started really going on a journey. So I always say to people that I was about on a journey for a year long to figure out what made me tick? What was I passionate about? What did I really care about? So I had a year of questions.
Wow.
And that brought me to the point where I realized my real passion lies in the development of people. I love nothing more than when I see someone flourish and achieving their ambitions. And I decided then to go back and study again. So at the ripe age of 35, I went back to varsity full time. This time I sold the business. And at the age of 35, I had youngsters all around me, which was very good for my spirit. And they were guiding me and showing me how things worked, because when I went to varsity the first time, we weren't that reliant on computers and things yet. And now, of course, it was the digital age and everything was being done on computers. So I went and I did my honours in psychology, and then since then I really haven't stopped studying. So my husband always jokes and says, but isn't there a point where you realise you know enough? And I'm like, no, there's always more to learn and more to experience. And that was just the journey that brought me to this point where now, for the past 12 years, so now you can work out where my age is as well. That's been my life, and I've loved it. I love this career. It is the perfect fit for me and allows me to live my passion every day.
That's amazing. It's so interesting when you do a retrospective and you see how valid that experience in the state agency was for you and how it built you and brought you to this space.
Yeah.
Because I notice with millennials choosing careers now, it's quite tricky because a lot of the careers they want to go into are not formalized. Nothing really grabs them, so they study something, they give up halfway, they study something else, and it's this feeling of it's not really what I want to do. So I thought it might be useful to start off with some definitions in your world. I'm interested to hear how do you define resilience, specifically in the corporate world and in high-performing teams?
Well, resilience is a topic that I'm specifically very interested in. I think having been exposed to quite a few things in my own life, understanding what it is that we have within us that helps us deal with challenges, that actually helps us get through the tough times, to me that's a very important thing. So I studied resilience extensively. I was lucky to do a big research project around it. And I often, if I work with groups, I'll ask the groups, like, how would they define resilience? And the definition that pops up most often is it's the ability to bounce back. And I think that's a good way to look at it. And it's also so much more than that.
Right.
So resilience really is about our ability to deal with challenge. And I want to point out here, it's not just negative challenge. In other words, something bad has happened to you. Sometimes something good happens to us, but it's also a challenge. That could be in the form of you've just received a promotion or you decide to start your own business. Those are positive challenges because you wanted them, you actually invite them into your life, but it still requires you to change and adapt to new ways of dealing with the world and with your current reality. So I see resilience not as a fixed thing, not as a trait. And in fact, there's a lot of research that backs it's not something you are or are not. And if you listen to how it's spoken about in the everyday world, people will say, well, I am resilient or I'm not resilient.
Right.
But if we think of our own lives, there are times where we just feel more able to cope with whatever life throws at us, or we find that we do that bouncing back but quite easily. And then there are moments where the challenge is maybe a bit deeper, or we just don't find that we have that same sense of being able to deal with the cards that are in front of us. So what is a helpful reframe is not to look at resilience as a thing that you are or are not, but to actually look at it as a thing that you do. So we are consistently resiliencing and in a process of coping, and that allows us to understand that it's a fluctuating thing, it's a process. So when something happens, it's actually about picking yourself up. How do you pick yourself up? What do you draw from? What are your resources? What's your mindset? Which emotions would support you best in that? So I like talking about not just bouncing back, but bouncing forward, because that actually means that you draw from the resources around you, the knowledge and information that's out there. A classic example would, for instance, be someone like President Nelson Mandela. If you think about the challenge that he went through in his life, being separated from family and from a network that was very important to him for so many years on Robben Island. And when he came out, he was a beacon to many other people. So inherently bouncing forward, and through that becoming someone who represents that inner strength and qualities that can help us not just deal with what has happened to us, but actually become an example of how to deal with things that happen to us.
So in working with groups, as I also do in the area of resilience, the one thing that I come across a lot is this perfectionism. And how does that impact our resilience, this continual striving? For example, we don't take lunch, we sit at our desk, we work all ridiculous hours, there's no work-life integration. Is there a link between perfectionism and low resilience?
Yeah, perfectionism is a very interesting topic, because many of my clients that I coach, when I meet them, would almost wear the fact that, I'm a perfectionist as a bit of a badge of honor. And then I know we're in for an interesting conversation because if we think about it, perfectionism as an ideal is something that we might want to strive for, but really isn't all that attainable, because life does happen to us and we are human. So what I always say to clients is focus on progress, not perfection. So and run your own race. So in other words, what is it that really matters to you? Stop comparing, in this life with Instagram, Facebook, this comparison game. And the other thing I also say is comparison is a thief of joy. Because, you might be the winner in one category, but in another one, you don't bake the best cake, or your house isn't the cleanest, even though you've reached the CEO position in an organization. So perfectionism can help to a point. I think it's important to know that all the things that we do in life are strategies that we use to help us cope. So if you think of what the benefit is, so maybe I could ask you that question. What do you think the potential benefit might be of striving for perfection or seeing oneself as a perfectionist?
Well, I think that it's around not having to get the feedback that you haven't done it well. So be seen to be just excellent at everything.
Yeah, so it helps the sense of identity.
Yeah.
Because many of us do actually have a bit of an imposter syndrome as well. So if I do everything perfect, at least I'm not opening myself up for criticism, right? The other thing is there's a sense of control.
Right.
So I think the first thing is to recognize that everything that we do, every strategy, we believe it has some benefit for us. Now, the problem with perfectionism is it then quickly turns into self-flagellation, that inner critic that comes out, and I could have done better here, I could push harder here, I got 98%, but what happened to the other 2%? And we live in a society that pushes us, and then we push ourselves to the point of exhaustion, to the point of, yes, we're excelling in areas, but we lose little bits of ourselves in the process. So I think if we could reframe it to rather say strive for excellence in the areas that matter to you. Because if you drive very hard in certain areas, something else must be compromised. That idea of you can have it all, I think it's Oprah that said, you can have it all, but not all at once. I don't know if I agree with that completely, but there's something about understanding that you need a rhythm. If you look at peak performers, top athletes, they focus quite strongly on what really matters, and other things have to get a bit of less attention in those periods where they're in peak training phases. So I think even work-life balance can trip us up, perfectionism can trip us up. So rhythm, I think rhythm, bringing in, understand that things ebb and flow. Understanding that excellence is something that you can strive for, but when we want to measure ourselves against perfectionism, that very often is a roadmap towards deep levels of criticizing ourselves, never feeling like we're on top of all of it, and that then puts us into a negative mindset, and that's very detrimental to resilience.
And so what I see, which is very alarming, is the high levels of diagnosed anxiety disorders, of depression, of psychotropic drugs people are taking with no therapy, no real understanding, and owning this label of I'm not coping, I have anxiety. And within that, just not looking after self, not saying no. And when I push back and I ask the question, but what stops you from saying no? I often get told, well, it's my job, I have to say yes. How does that fit into resilience and excellence?
Yes, so saying no for some of us can be one of the most difficult things to do, because it's not the saying no per se that's difficult. I mean, it's a 2-letter word, right?
It's true.
But it's everything that comes with it. So if I'm working with clients, what I do is lots of conversations around belief systems. So if I say no, what do I believe will happen? In the corporate world, what I usually hear is, well, it's a career limiting move. It's not done in this organization. I want to get ahead in my career, and being the one that's the go-to person is the thing that will get me ahead. Some people are conditioned not to say no. They were taught in their family systems to please people, to keep everyone happy. So everything around that is quite deeply ingrained for people, and I think it's very important, whether we are coaches or whether we are working in the leadership development field, to bring quite a lot of compassion to the topic of saying no. It's a big step for people. And I think that if we can do it in incremental levels, so maybe it's not an immediate no, maybe it's could I just go check my diary first? Could I just assess what my capacity is at this moment? Can I sleep on it and get back to you tomorrow? So assisting people to find ways to dialogue around a no, because a firm no is very threatening for people. Right. Not everyone. Okay, there are people that are very comfortable with no's, and maybe we can learn a bit from them. Now, how does that link back to resilience? Well, if you think about it, we all have a certain amount of capacity, right? We don't have an infinite amount of energy. There is constraints around time. And if you hold something else dear, like doing excellent work, you will compromise that level of excellence if you keep on taking more and more and more. And what I often find with my clients, it's actually tapping into the other values that will help them to understand the importance and the benefit of having boundaries. And I use that word with caution because people have a different attachment to the word boundaries. Boundaries can also be, you can have a firm boundary, you can have a fluid boundary, just like you can have a fence versus a 10-foot wall. Yeah. Those are also boundaries, but they're different types of boundaries. So there's some flexibility around that. But if we keep on saying yes and yes and yes, imagine a basket that has a certain amount of capacity, and you keep on putting more and more and more into it, eventually things will fall out.
Right.
And if it's something that falls out and it's not something that really matters, that's okay. But what if it's something that does really matter, like your health, or the relationships that are specifically meaningful to you, or that one project that actually is the one that's going to take you to the level you want to be at, and those are the ones that end up falling out. Or maybe you can hold that basket while you're walking, but if I ask you to run with it,
right,
now it becomes very difficult. So addressing how we deal with requests, what we say yes to, what we say no to, why we say yes to what we say yes to. Do we really want to, or do we feel compelled to? And what I usually say to people is, every time you say yes to something, you say no to something else. Mm-hmm. And what is that thing you're saying no to?
And often it's to self and to self priority.
Yes, and to the things that really contribute to a meaningful life, like taking a moment and enjoying nature, like connecting with our children or loved ones, or doing art, whatever it is that fires us up. And we can work in organizations that will promote that culture, because the belief is, work harder, harder, harder. What I try and work with my clients is now work smarter. Because if we were rewarded for hard work, then mine workers would be the best paid people in the world, right? Because they work incredibly hard under terrible circumstances. So actually we're not being rewarded for hard work. We are being rewarded for the results we get, and usually we get that out of smart work.
Working in the coaching space that you find yourself, what is your view on remediation coaching? So somebody gets coaching is requested because they're not performing in the role. How do you work with an objective like that?
So I think the first thing to do there is to take a step back and have a good conversation with whoever is bringing you into the organization, be that HR or someone in learning and development, or sometimes even the line manager who's bringing you in to work with this person. What I have found, and this is just my personal opinion, is that there are moments where the role of having the real conversation and training and upskilling that person, which should sit with the line manager and the organization, gets abdicated or put onto the coach. And that's a very dangerous place for a coach to move into, because coaches are not there to carry what the system should be carrying for itself. So I think before one even speaks to the person, it's actually to understand what role and expectation does the organization have of you. Linked to that, it becomes quite problematic if coaching is seen in that area, because it depends which coaching school you come from, but certainly the ethos that I go from is that coaching is an empowering and enabling thing. It's about recognizing the person who's sitting opposite you as a human being who has capacity and capability and intelligence, and that they're able to address the issues that they have to address in life. And if one walks into any coaching engagement with it, this is a remedial thing, it already puts a certain element into the room. Now, I differentiate between coaching someone and using coaching skills to assist and support someone. Right. I think coaching skills, which is the ability to be present, to listen to someone, to gain understanding, to ask questions, those are very helpful. Whether it be for the person is struggling and let's help them to deal with what they have to, or whether it's a high flyer that wants to go to the next level. You can use coaching skills at the dinner table. You can use coaching skills around the conference table, the boardroom. Coaching, in order for someone to be coached, they have to trust you, because they are not going to let you into their world if they don't feel safe with you. And my area of concern is that if you are brought in and seen as I'm putting this in brackets, an agent of the organization, additional work has to be done around the boundaries, the clarification, what your role as coach is. Make sure that you're not stepping into that space of actually doing what the line manager should be doing. So that's not the field of coaching that I do. I work more with people who are achieving and want to go to the next level. But even high achievers will have moments where their performance slips, or they're having struggle. I just think the key thing actually is how is the organization trying to use you for something that they should be doing themselves, and being very clear. And there's a very good book written by a gentleman called Mark Kahn about coaching on the axis. I think you've been exposed to his work, Colleen, and he articulates very nicely what you need to be aware of as a coach when you enter those types of situations. So it's doable, but you have to be clear about your role in that space.
I think Mark Kahn did episode 2 on our podcast. Yeah, he's got a really nice episode around his coaching on the axis, and he certainly is very clear. And what I also admire about Mark is he won't get into that game of being the messenger, which often happens with coaching providers.
Yes.
So how do you manage to have a work-life balance, integration, you're flying a lot, you've got a lot of interests and passions and hobbies. How do you take care of yourself?
Well, first of all, that's an ongoing conversation I have with myself because I know how important it is. It helps a lot that I love the work that I do. So a lot of what I do for my work doesn't feel like work, and I realize that I'm very blessed to be able to say that. I want to point out that I didn't get to this place easily. I had to consistently figure out what am I saying yes to, what am I saying no to. I think it's one of the reasons why I don't believe in balance, because I've certainly seen that I can't have balance. If I think of how I fly, the amount of time I spend in Johannesburg, my family is in Cape Town. Of course, the majority of my time, a work week is 5 days. So that means I'm working 5 days and then I'm in Cape Town 2 days of the week. But what do I do? So my husband and I take regular breaks together. So about every 3 months I'll take a week off and we'll do something fun together and just spend time.
Wow.
And that can even be at home, but it's about that quality time together. When we are together, we're really together. So I do my best to limit anything that I do over weekends. Having said that, if I've got something that is critical, we've got a very good relationship in that I can say to him, like, this really needs my attention. And he's also in business, so it helps that we both have a similar understanding there. I think it's quite difficult when you don't. From a family structure, the children are older now, so they're not, I don't think they'd even like being called children. And so now it's more social time, so I don't have that pressure on myself, and I take my hat off to parents that work and have young kids at school. It is a balancing act bar none. I can only stand back in awe when I look at how people balance that place. I take a month off every December, so I don't work at all during December, which is a wonderful time to regroup. Many of my friends are in the industry, so we will have a hard day of working and then we'll meet afterwards and we'll chat, and I find that's a wonderful way to just regroup and also draw from my support network. Luckily, I live in Cape Town. Nature's right there.
Exactly.
I like long walks next to the ocean. So I try and find out what are the things that replenish me. Relationships replenish me. Nature replenishes me. My pets certainly do. Time with family and people that I love. I read a lot. And I find that's quite a good thing as well.
What are you reading at the moment?
I've always got a few different books going at any given time. At the moment, I'm actually rereading Brené Brown's work around Rising Strong, which is very linked to resilience, right? It's that whole concept of someone who, her previous book was Daring Greatly. So if you dare greatly, you're going to fall sometimes. How do you get up? And that's what Rising Strong is about. I really do enjoy that. I'm reading a book about Paris. It's my favorite city in the world. Can I say that as a Cape Townian?
Yes, you may.
Okay. So, I love Cape Town too, but Paris has always held a special place in my heart. So I read a lot around France and how the French people look at life. And I think that echoes a part of my philosophy, which is you don't have to have big luxuries in life, but the little luxuries, like a nice cup of coffee, going to sit at a cafe and reading a book. That lifestyle really resonates with me very strongly. And then I'm actually busy because I'm designing a program at the moment, which is around adaptive leadership and the ability to deal with change. So I've got like 4 books on the Kindle at the moment, which I'm playing between.
Yes.
And the one is called Adaptive Leadership, and then the other 2 are really around change. And now that I'm thinking about it, I've also just dipped quite strongly back into Peter Singer's work, The Fifth Discipline, because that also resonates. I'm doing something on personal mastery for a client at the moment. So some of the books will be geared towards anything that I'm designing, and then some of them are just for pleasure and personal interest. And then December is when I read crime. That's when I do the crime novels, because I can't put it down once I start.
Right.
So I'm one of those people that I'll read for 2 days straight and hardly speak to anyone, and I can't really do that in a work week.
So I'm fascinated about this adaptive leadership. Can you tell us a bit more about what you're finding out?
Yeah. So adaptive leadership, it really came to my attention. So I was lucky enough to do some studies at Oxford recently. It sounds a bit like name dropping, and it is. I mean, it's
you own it. It's
quite nice. That was like one of those bucket list items in my life, to be able to say that I've studied there. It was an amazing moment in my life, and there I was exposed to the work of Heifetz, and he did work around when leaders face really challenging times. Now, it's not just change, so you're restructuring or something like that. It's when you really have to adapt to an environment or a situation that is incredibly complex with many moving parts. And the way that you've dealt with things in the past are not going to equip you to deal with what you're facing now. So it is about that capacity to be adaptive, to actually develop and harness things that you've never had to before. It's about engaging with people in fundamentally different ways. It's about bringing different voices to the table to help and deal with whatever one is facing. So in a way, if you think about it, Cape Town went through a bit of an adaptive crisis the past couple of months and year in terms of the water crisis that we're facing. We've all had to find ways to creatively adjust to the fact that, at a point we were facing D-Day with no water. Wow. And what do you have to do? How do you have to live differently? What different mindset do you have to bring to things to be able to deal with that? So individually, I think every household had to do that, but as a community, we also had to. And it's really about how do you work with people? How do you bring that message through in a time like that? An example in our country was, 1994. That was an adaptive challenge as a whole country. And you can see that in many ways we're probably still struggling with that. That we've maybe put policies and procedures and laws into place, but the mindset still needs some adjustment. And we need to really harness people's hearts and minds in a different way in order to truly embrace everything that we want to stand for as a country.
And does this speak a bit to fixed mindset versus growth mindset? Is it similar?
Absolutely. So you cannot have adaptive capacity if you don't have an open mindset. They go totally together. So in order to be adaptive, you need to be curious, you need to learn, you need to know you don't have all the answers. Who are you going to connect with in order to get the answers? You've got to ask questions, not just like what and how will we do things, but why are we doing them in the first place? So it's a deep level of working and engaging with the world around us.
And if I think of some of the clients that we come across in the boardroom, some senior executives, you don't always see those competencies displayed. You see the opposite.
Yeah. So when people are under stress, and I think we can maybe think of in our own worlds, we tend to close up. We become protective. We try to focus on what we are certain about because that makes us feel safe. And adaptive challenges require us to be more comfortable with uncertainty. They require us to actually be confident and also say, I don't have all the answers. And that's a scary thing for CEOs and, ExCo members, ManCo members, because you get the position you have because you're the one that's supposed to be certain and have all the answers. But when you're facing an adaptive challenge, because that situation has not happened before, there's no blueprint you can go back to. So you have to come up with new answers, and the day of one person having all the answers is gone. That doesn't exist anymore. So now it's about accessing different strengths and showing up differently. And I think it's a very challenging space for leaders because we shouldn't lose line of sight of the fact that they still have to look after business as usual. They usually have shareholders that have certain expectations about, goal attainment, deliverables, share price, etc. And so it takes a very special person to be willing to do the work that it takes to be truly adaptive and to lead themselves and organizations through spaces like that.
And what are the benefits should they shift that thinking? What are the gifts of becoming more adaptive?
Well, that's a really great question. The first one is that your capacity to deal with whatever is you're facing increases. The second one is that you really learn the true value of collaborative leadership. and drawing from the strengths of those around you. So it's not as isolating, because leaders can feel very isolated, specifically when they feel they have to carry the burden of everything on them and that they're supposed to have all the answers. And there are beautiful examples in history of leaders that did have strong adaptive capacity, even though they were never trained into it. So Lincoln would be an example of that. You can definitely go and look at the way that not just Nelson Mandela, but many of the leaders in the ANC had to show up and do things differently in order to achieve the aims and ambitions that they, that they were looking at. And we can go beyond sort of the political arena. If you think of, I'm going to bring it to a very a much smaller scale. Let's say you run a business that was always, everything was done manually. Just adapting to doing things digitally. Mm-hmm. That's an adaptive challenge, right? It might look like it's just a learning thing, but in actual fact, you have to expose yourself to a whole new way of operating in the world. So in big and small ways, we actually face them all the time. I'm so passionate about it. I've now got to regroup and go back to what are the benefits. Yeah, so it just enables you to deal with more. It keeps you in a very mentally fit state because you're learning. And the more you learn, the more you know, the more you know, the more you can, you have more possibility available to you. And of course, it keeps you relevant, because if you can't adapt, I mean, years ago there was a show called Adapt or Die, so scary, but it is in that realm of survival of the fittest. If you cannot adapt and the world around you is changing, you're not on the bus when the bus is about to leave.
Looking at team resilience and resilient leaders, I suppose eventually these things all start to sound a little similar. How can teams who run hard, they've got lots of deadlines, lots of complex things, as you mentioned, how can teams incorporate resilience to be better, higher performing teams?
One of the first things that I would suggest is to have a conversation around that, and actually for the team to ask themselves that question, because the wisdom and the answer to it often resides within the team. Now, sometimes the challenge with peak performers is to get them to consider the fact that they also need to focus on something like resilience, because peak performers view themselves as resilient. And that is great and that is good. What it does mean, though, is that there's not necessarily an acknowledgement that you might not always be, on an upwards trend. So what do you do if the market shifts and you were used to peak performance and now for a month or two, despite your best efforts, things aren't happening? So having a preemptive conversation around when we do face challenges, what would we do? How would we deal with it? How would we support each other? Because one of the biggest aspects of resilience is a support network. Having people that you can depend on. And there I always say to people, build the bridge before you need it. Don't work so hard that you lose sight of the people around you, and then one day when you are in trouble, you look around, you're standing there on your own. So make sure you nurture those relationships. Then one of the things that I think is really underestimated in resilience is resources. Pausing and actually saying, which resources do we have that will help us? Which don't we have that we need to get hold of? How well do we manage and look after the resources that are available to us? And then this whole concept of consistently scanning the environment, we can become quite inward focused. So when we're successful, we're running. It could be that we're not looking around to see what is happening around us, and that's when we get caught off guard. Now, traumatic things can also happen to teams that come totally from the left field. I'm thinking now, and I can't remember the exact situation, but 2-3 years ago there was a soccer team and they were all flying and the plane crashed. So what about the people that were around them, their support team? Can you imagine what that must have done to them, and how do you build and lift yourself out of that type of situation? And then organizations also have to constantly be resiliencing. stay relevant. If you think of the big ask these days, everything is about, disruptive change, and everyone wants, it's such a buzzword. But if that's a reality, then the thing is, how do you make sure that you will survive for another day? How do you make sure that you've got your networks and your resources and your people in a position that they can deal with what's coming their way? And I think that's a very big conversation for organizations to actually have. I'm dealing with a client at the moment, a listed company, and they're facing that exact question.
So speaking about the whole idea of change, do you feel that organizations sometimes experience change fatigue? There's so many new ideas and everyone wants to be disruptive and got to keep innovating, but there isn't just the space to just consolidate and be consistent.
That is a major topic that I'm hearing at the moment. So from the employees in the organization that would say to me, we are exhausted, Tanya. We don't, we're waiting for that moment where we can just pause and breathe. And then before we can do that, the next thing's on top of us again. I think organizations too, the demands are high, the stakes are high. Now you're in a bit of a catch-22. Because if you don't change, what's the alternative? Is you're not relevant anymore. If you do consistently change, then it's about how do you assist people, how do you support people to deal with that. And maybe we need to just dip into a bit of neuroscience around that. Now, I'm not pretending to be a neuroscientist, I'm not at all, but I've had the benefit of being exposed to people that are experts in that field. And my understanding from what they share is our brain is always geared to scan the environment for risk and reward. And one of the things that the brain really likes is certainty. Because if we know what's going to happen tomorrow, we can plan for it. So we feel safer. So uncertainty is very triggering for people. It's very unsettling. Now, if you think about it, uncertainty means I don't know if I'll have a job tomorrow. Uncertainty means I don't know if I'll be working in the same team or not. Uncertainty means I don't know if the skill set that I have is even going to be required by the organization. So it really creates a lot of anxiety within people. And when people are anxious, their brains devote resources to helping them feel more safe, as opposed to what we want in organizations, which is people to really be in their prefrontal cortex, where they do their most intelligent, logical, deeper work of strategy and long-term thinking and complex work that requires really higher order brain processing. So that is, I think, why people have such absolute change fatigue, is there isn't just a moment to really recalibrate, to get a sense of catching your breath, and to have that momentary, sort of not even in a moment, but hopefully a little bit more than a moment, a week or two of just, I can breathe, I can relax. Now the thing is there really an alternative? This acronym that's thrown around all the time, I hear it almost daily. I'm almost concerned to use it because I've got a bit of fatigue around the word. But VUCA, which is that we live in a world that's volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Now, is there a sign that it's going to change? I don't know. Because if we look at the political arena, if we look at the environmental arena, if we look at just the rate that technology is speeding up everything, when will that day come where we can actually just say, okay, well, sort of stop the world from spinning. I need to get off for a moment. That probably is one of the adaptive challenges that we have to face at the moment, is that change is not going to stop unless something major happens. It's going to, the sign is that that's the trend, that change is the new normal. One of my colleagues said the other day, like flux is where it's at. Everything is in flux all the time. Now the question becomes, if I can't reckon on a period where things won't be changing, what is now required of me? And that's a big part of the work that I find myself doing these days, is to assist people to say, if the world is spinning, how do I at least make sure that I have an internal sense of equilibrium? How do I make sure that I'm able to have an internal sense of steadiness about me when everything else is changing? And that asks people to really probably think a bit wider about their careers, not just have one thing and that's the only thing, probably look at some additional form of be it income or an alternative, a sideline that's available to you, that if option A isn't available to you anymore, you have an option B. So it's getting that sense of security in self and not looking for it that much more in the external world. Of course, we'll look for it there, but it is about getting it from an internal space too. I think that's one of the reasons why mindfulness is such a big thing, is because it helps you get access that quiet. And that's maybe one of the things, just now when you asked me what do, I have a daily mindfulness practice. I believe use technology to help you. Get some apps that can assist you to have a regular mindfulness practice. And it's not linked to religion or any kind of a dogma. It's really about being in the present moment, being aware of your thinking, creating a sense of spaciousness where you are. I regularly say to clients, find pockets of calm in your day, because the brain is fatigued. That is what it's about. The brain is consistently on high alert. And if you're uncertain about big things, what are the small things you can be certain about? So it's just bringing a bit of a holistic perspective to all those things. And I think that's why we see a return to very basic things that people are, like getting back into the kitchen, getting back into the garden, going out in nature. Now, I'm very aware as I'm speaking that I'm speaking to those people that have the luxury of being able to do that. Such a vast part of our population are in survival mode. They are really worried about where the next plate of food is going to come from. And what breaks my heart is that they very often not the people that have access to what they most need to be able to deal with things. Highly resilient people, though, I want to give a shout out as well. I think when we travel on our roads and we see that person selling something on the street corner, that's an example of living resilience right there in front of us. So it is, if you have the luxury to be able to step back and ask yourself those questions. And I'm a big believer, everyone needs their anchors in life. So what anchors you? For some people, it's contributing to society. For some people it's their religion, for some people it's their family, or your values. What anchors you? So what brings you back to center? But then also what gives you wings? What delights you? What excites you? What makes you feel most alive? And I think the big thing that I say to people with this is live your life by design, because otherwise you're living it by default, and then that sense of consistent change around you is even worse.
I want to pick up, there was so much there that I wanted to say, but you spoke a bit about how the brain will allocate resources if you're not feeling safe. So then what is the default then to the reptilian brain if it's not prefrontal? So then how does that impact your behavior? And
yeah. So that's a very big topic. So so first of all, it's to understand that the brain is hierarchical, and I find for myself, I sort of want to push back against that and say, no, like I'm a very intelligent, competent person. Surely I'm in my prefrontal cortex all the time. But the reality is we're not. We first of all scan from deep inside our limbic brain. And again, I'm putting in a disclaimer here, I'm not a neuroscientist. So please go and, make sure of everything that I'm sharing now. But we have right inside our brain a little thing about the size of a small nut called the amygdala or the amygdala, and that's where we scan for survival, risk reward. So everything is first scanned towards, is this good for me or is this bad for me? Will this help me survive or does it threaten me? Then from there we go through to the limbic system, and in the limbic system, that's where our memories reside and our emotions reside. So when something happens, we go back into the memory banks, we link it to past situations, and this is where the brain interprets things in weird and wonderful ways. That's where a perceived threat and a real threat is read the same way by the brain. So even if I just think something's threatening, or I perceive it as threatening, it will read it as a real threatening situation. And then, of course, all the emotions come. You spoke about anxiety earlier. Could be frustration. Could be fear. It could be really that strong. Could also be excitement. So maybe what you're seeing on the horizon seems quite exciting to you and feels like it holds potential. But only once we've processed all of that do we then go into the real, clearer thinking. Now, the thing is, if the emotions, etc., have triggered us so badly that we can't access that prefrontal cortex, that's often where we will see people do strange things. So we'll say, but why aren't people acting like adults around here? They're not acting that way because in that moment they're feeling the fear on quite a primal level. People shut down. So things that I hear from my clients is, I've been working with a colleague for 8 years. We always used to share information. We used to joke around. Now they won't tell me what's going on anymore. And they're very snappy. So that's how we will see behavior shifts entering to people. Some people sleep more, they sleep less. So it's just behavior patterns, ways of engagement shifts.
So I know that we're running out of time, and we haven't yet touched on how I came to meet you, which is around the Gestalt therapy and your approach. And I was very lucky to do a role play with you. Yes. I have to share with you, we were doing the Gibbs coaching course, and the people in the room afterwards, because you asked for a volunteer, right? There were like, I don't know, 30 people in the room.
Yes.
And they were like, how did you manage to go volunteer? And I just thought it was the most amazing opportunity for me. And they were like, that was so brave, but it didn't feel brave. It just felt like, wow, I get to be in a role play with such an expert as yourself. So maybe just to end a little bit around Gestalt and how you use it.
So first of all, I sort of want to echo what they told you. It is brave. Whenever we put ourselves in front of a group and we're willing to share parts of ourselves, that is a courageous act. And maybe just to acknowledge that.
Thank you.
And so in terms of Gestalt, so I have had the great benefit and honour of working with a lady in South Africa called Chantal Wiley, and she's really an expert on Gestalt. And she introduced me to the concept of using Gestalt when coaching people. So there are Gestalt therapists, but because I'm not a therapist, so I use it in the coaching field. And Gestalt is a beautiful. So first of all, the word means looking at the whole. It's a German word. So looking at an entire situation and all the components of it, and then looking to identify patterns and see what comes. What do we pay our attention to? What is in the field? So in other words, what is the greater aspect of what's happening? But then very specific, what is the figure? What is the thing we choose to focus on in situations? And Gestalt has a beautiful way of working, which is you work with what is present in the moment. So you're not living in the past, you're not living in the future, you're not living in the story of a thing, but you rather look at how someone is storying their experience of what they're facing. So in Gestalt, you would pay a lot of attention to how someone says what they say, the specific words that they use, the body language. It's very experimental in nature. So you would actually, while you are working with your client, maybe ask them to do little things. A classic example of Gestalt way of working would be, let's say someone's having conflict with someone, and they're telling you how they can't get along with their colleague. You would have them, you would basically put 3 chairs or 2 chairs that are unoccupied around them, and then you would have them speak from their perspective, their thoughts, their feelings, their experience around it. And then you would invite them to occupy one of the empty chairs. And when they occupy that chair, they actually are invited to speak from the perspective that they're having, of the person that they're having conflict with. So it's to try and shift them to see things from a different perspective. And then you could even ask them to take a third seat, which is the perspective of the observer. And they get the experiential sense of there are more perspectives than just mine. How might I see it if I put a different lens on? So Gestalt is very experimental, and I'm still learning about it all the time. It's so rich and so beautiful and so valuable for all of us to be able to. I think you don't have to be a coach to actually look at Gestalt, and you can even use Gestalt work when you do design, because in advertising it's also about, if you think of a layout on a magazine, there's a lot of stuff on the page, but what is the one thing that really pops out, and how as a graphic designer would you put the focus on the figure that you want to emerge from the
That's fascinating.
From the field.
Thank you so much, Tanya. There's so much more we can go through.
Oh, this is my pleasure.
It's really been enlightening, and we hope to have you back in studio at some point to talk more. And thank you for your valuable time and your wisdom and just the generosity of everything you've taught. I've learned so much just sitting here doing the podcast. So Thank you very much.
Thanks, Colleen. It's been a great experience, and what I love the most is that with the questions you asked me, it really got me into my thinking mindset. So I really appreciate that very much, and thanks for the opportunity.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Organizations are placing increasing demands on employees. Those in leadership positions are expected to impart vision, initiate change, and make difficult decisions over and above their operational duties. And this, Tanya explains, is how we have to start to deal with adaptive leadership. How are you showing up with all the change in your organization? We hope that this episode provided some helpful tips and hacks for you to relook your leadership and how you deal with change. If you liked the episode, please subscribe and comment on our website www.omnicore.co.za. Check out our blogs and our previous episodes, and thank you again to William Irwin, our producer.